Good afternoon, Dr. May here. I hope you're having a great weekend. So this is the 5th bi-monthly assignment video. So let's go ahead and get into the video. So the first question from Night by Alex Monroe, it asks, Night begins with a general statement about the narrator's family background during wartime in Canada and continues with a very specific description of her troubled recovery from her operation. How does Monroe move her plot from the exterior account of the narrator's illness to the interior account of her mental suffering, concluding with the resolution of her emotional problem? Quote to prove your point. Okay, so just to kind of unwind that. So at the beginning of the story, Alice Monroe focuses on the narrator's illness in a physical way and in a very physical and external way. She talks about the environment, the snowstorm, and the trip to the hospital. And then, for example, here I have on page 533, the first paragraph, the narrator, it says, there seemed to be never a childbirth that did not occur simultaneously with a snowstorm. And basically this shows how the story starts with the outside events and physical struggles. And as the story continues, Monroe slowly shifts. The story starts to shift more inward toward the narrator's thoughts and mental state. And after the surgery, the narrator begins to feel strange and disconnected, especially at night when she cannot sleep. And I should have put something about that. On page 538, middle paragraph, I was not myself. Say that's the quote that I use. And this is important because it shows that her problem is no longer physical. It is now psychological, and whenever people have a lot of psychological problems, they can kind of like become like not themselves, because our brain is very powerful. And this internal struggle begins to build until it reaches its most intense moment, when she has a disturbing thought about harming her sister. And let's see. And then I got another. Yeah, on page 539. On page 539, at the end of 539, the thought that I could strangle my little sister, whom I loved more than anybody in the world. The thought that I could strangle my little sister, whom I loved more than anybody in the world. That's what it says. And then this just shows like how like detrimental and just how like very scary like mental illness can be. I've never experienced this firsthand, but I know that it could obviously is very scary. And yeah, no, I can't imagine that. And just like the other quote that I use, I was not myself. It seems like, when people have these mental illnesses, they're not themselves, which it's terrible, because I think mental health is just as important as your physical health, because you can see early signs of like mental illnesses. And yeah, I'm a firm believer in, you need to take care of yourself both mentally and physically. But anyways, and then finally, the story, it resolves when she talks to her father. His calm reaction helps her to understand that these thoughts do not define her, that the thoughts do not define her, and she begins to feel more in control again. So overall, Monroe moves from an external physical problem to basically a deep internal emotional conflict, and then to a resolution. I think it's important also to like talk to people too, because that's also very, it's just very important. So, moving on to the next question. it says Monroe's story takes place during June in the waning years of World War II when the narrator was 14 years old. In the opening paragraph of Night, she refers to gas rationing in Canada. How does the narrator's fear that she will strangle her little sister suggest the abnormal times she has been living in? So, again, the story takes place during World War II, and this setting creates a stressful and abnormal environment. So, I mean, it's during a time of war. In the opening paragraph of page 533, actually, the narrator mentions here. Yeah, it says the war and gas rationing had changed all that. This just shows that, daily life, how hard daily life is, and how it was already really difficult and tense. Yeah, so I've never lived during a very bad war like World War II, but I can only imagine what everyone has been going through during that time. And because of this environment, the narrator's fear and anxiety feels more extreme. Her thought about hurting her sister is shocking, and especially because she loves her. I mean, it's her little sister. Family is family, and even having mental issues, mental health struggles during wartime, that increased anxiety, increased depression, I can only imagine. Yeah, and then this shows how basically her mind is affected by the stress around her. The contrast between love and violent thoughts basically suggests that she is overwhelmed and not thinking normally, obviously. And in this way, her fear reflects the larger sense of instability and fear caused by the war. There's a lot of fear, can be instilled in others because of war, other countries threatening other civilians in other countries, it's terrible that people do that, but some people do that. Countries do that, and I've lived through the war on terror and stuff. I've never lived through actual full on world war, like World War II or World War One, or the Vietnam War in that sense. But yeah, just the fear, of people and the fear of all the families of the soldiers, who they don't know if they're going to come home or not, just fear, So moving on to question 3, it says the narrator's father believes that his daughter's murderous thoughts are the result of the ether she was given in the hospital when she was operated on for appendicitis. How does his calm reaction to her emotional distress help her? Well, I think always having a calm voice there to really help you in your time of struggles, having a good friend or a dad or a mom or just, a family member, it's just someone who you can trust to tell you, your deepest secrets or things that are really bothering you. And when the narrator finally tells her father about her thoughts, his reaction is very calm and understanding, like it says. Instead of panicking or judging her, he listens carefully and offers a simple explanation. That is sometimes the very best things that people can have in life, is having someone who you can trust with your literal life. That is, I think what allows people to just be able to fully live their lives, because a lot of people bottle up their emotions. A lot of people bottle up what they feel. And that's the worst thing. They try to distract themselves. They try to shove every pain down deep and just neglect it. And that is the worst thing. That's just why I have such a strong feeling towards, reaching out for help, because you can reach out for help. No one is too good for help. No one is too good for just a shoulder. And on page 540, he says on page 540, he suggests that her thoughts might be caused by either from her surgery. By saying this, he makes her feel like what she is experiencing is temporary and not something dangerous. And that's the other thing, a lot of mental health is temporary. It's not forever. Now there are some rare cases, with like just mental disabilities, which is absolutely terrible. I hate that. But a lot of the stuff that people go through is temporary, like, for example, this class isn't going to last forever. Not saying anything, but just, in layman's terms, or like a rainstorm, for example. A rainstorm is not going to last forever. But just being there for the person, getting help, and just moving together as a team is very crucial for people who go through mental health issues. So going on to part 2, the Midnight Zone, both of these stories also really good stories. All the stories that I've read in this class have really had a deeper meaning than what it usually could portray, if I would say that. It's just, there's a lot of good things that you can kind of critique and take out of the story. So moving on to the questions. The first question: what makes the title appropriate for the story? Well, Midnight Zone, it's appropriate because it represents both a physical and emotional state. Literally, it refers to the dark, midnight, isolated environment where the story takes place, but it also symbolizes the narrator's mental state. She's dealing with stress, she's dealing with fear, confusion, especially after her accident. And the midnight zone can be seen as a place of uncertainty, danger, and emotional darkness, really. Question 2, it asks, how does the setting prepare us for the narrator's accident? Well, the setting of the story creates a strong sense of danger from the very beginning. And on page 252... Okay, here. On page 252, in the first paragraph, the narrator describes the area as 20 miles of scrub and mentions a panther nearby. This shows that they're far away from safety and help. And there's also limited electricity, no internet, and very little communication from the outside world. Very little internet. That's, especially in today's world, it seems like all we can rely on is internet. All we can rely on is, our phones, or, our computer, or video games, Instagram, whatever. And like a limited electricity, it really just puts me into perspective, kind of like how much we truly, take for granted, how much stuff we take for granted. It's just, that's just what I kind of am just going on about. I kind of put myself inside the story. And all these details make the reader feel, it makes me feel specifically, something could go wrong at any moment, really. They're in the dark without electricity, or limited electricity, no internet, very little communication. Does not seem optimal, right? And when the narrator falls and hits her head, it does not feel random, in that it feels like something the setting was preparing us for the entire time, basically. Like it was going to happen at some point. And yeah, just going back to just how much we rely on stuff. yeah, it's truly interesting. Let's see. Okay. Question 3. It says, what are the benefits of using a first-person narrator to tell the story? The benefits of a first-person narrator. So the use of a first-person narrator, um, it makes the story feel very personal and immediate. We experience everything directly through her thoughts and emotions. We're there in the story with her. We're able to feel everything she feels. We're able to touch everything she touches, go through what she goes through. That is what makes a story so good. Whenever you feel like you're in there with them, that's when you lose all sense of time, basically, and you're just flipping through pages. And for example, we understand her frustration, fear, and even her guilt as a mother because she tells us exactly what she is thinking. And this makes the story more emotional and intense. And it also just helps the reader connect with their situation, especially during the accident, because we feel like we were going through it with her. We feel like we're going through everything she's going through. And then moving on to the final question, it says, why does Groff leave the story open-ended? You know, I don't know what to say. I think, Groff leaves the story open-ended to make it feel a little more realistic and thought-provoking in real life. Not like, what I mean by in real life is like that sometimes there's not a good ending to every story. And sometimes there isn't an ending to a story. For example, you look at all of these investigations or whatever. I don't know why, this is just the first thing that popped in my head was about like investigations into, criminals. Sometimes they never find the person. Or like a missing person, they never find the missing person. It's so sad. Because, you want that closure, you want to close that book, but sometimes you may not get it. And that's just kind of how life is in general. Sometimes you might not get the answer you want. You might not get the outcome you want. Sometimes you may not get any closure at all. And just kind of going back, like the story, like not everything is neatly resolved, like in real life. Again, what I was saying, and it says by not giving a clear ending, the reader is left wondering, what will happen next, how the experience will affect the narrator and her family. And this also reflects the uncertainty and lack of control that the narrator feels throughout the story, making the ending match the overall theme. And sometimes we feel like we can't get a grasp on life. But yeah, that's what I think. I think that's close to time. I just want to thank you for listening to me ramble on. We're already almost done with the school year. It's crazy. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in class.